we'll understand Spark architecture. So this is very important, authentication, authorization. Like consider you have Netflix. So if you are going to log in, so you should have some account. So once you log in, nothing but using a credentials, you log into the account. One session will be created, user session will be created. So user session will be created, that is called authentication. So once you log into the applications, right? If you want to access, like you want to watch some movies, you want to watch some series. So you need a subscription. Without subscription, you cannot watch. That is called authorization. So privileges to access those services. Privileges to access those services. That is called authorization. Authentication is just a user session will be created. You need some account. Once you log into that, session will be created. User session will be created. Then you can use any subscription and go and watch that. That is called authorization. Privileges. Like if you want to watch kids movies, if you want to watch series, movies, anything, documentaries, anything you can watch. That is called authentication, authorization. So similarly, when you talk about Spark, Spark also is having similar kind of concept. Like every database will have a, whenever you log in using a database SQL user and password, then it will create one session, user session. It will create a backend user session. So that is SQL session will be created. Then whenever you submit a code on a particular server, the backend context will be there. It will go and create separate context for you. Similarly, whenever you use a notebook and you need to communicate to the Spark, right? So that is Spark session. Session will be available, a variable called Spark. A variable called Spark. And different kinds of contexts are available. Spark core is nothing but RDD. If you want to communicate Spark core, primarily RDD. Then they introduced the SQL module, separate SQL module. So initially they introduced the Spark core, right? For that they have a separate context called SQL context. They have a separate context called Spark context. Initially Spark session, Spark context. Then they introduced the SQL separate module for data frame, data process, and SQL they introduced. For that, they introduced separate context called SQL context. Similarly, structured streaming, they have a streaming context. So multiple contexts are available. Spark session is for authentication and context are for authorization. Context are for authorization. But what they did, again, they in between they introduced a Hive context as well, mainly running a Hive SQL in Spark. So Spark context, SQL context, Hive context. So if you have a multiple context, right, obviously developers will have a confusion. So what they did, whatever your SQL context is going to do, privileges they granted to Spark session. Boss, you don't need to worry about a SQL context. You don't need to worry about a Spark context. You don't need to worry about a Hive context. Even if you have a multiple context, go and use a Spark session. So they have granted SQL context, Spark context, all this Hive context privileges to Spark session. Now Spark session can manage as for authentication plus authorization. Now Spark 2.0, 2.0 version onwards, Spark session is having a privileges as you can go and use directly create a data frame, directly data set. For data frame, data set, they introduced one module called SQL. So for that, they used a context called SQL context. So you no need to use SQL context. You no need to use a Spark context. Go and use a Spark session. That privileges are already granted to Spark session. So Spark session is like both now, authentication plus authorization. Authentication, authorization. Let me show you that. Let me show you that. So now cluster is available. You can verify how much time it has taken. So driver is healthy. 35, 48 seconds. 39, you say this, 38, 52 seconds. So 3 minutes, then 4 seconds. 3 minutes, 4 seconds. So 3 minutes, 4 seconds. So 2 to 5 minutes in between. Sometimes 4 minutes, sometimes 3 minutes, sometimes 2.5 minutes. Very rare scenarios I observed less than 1 minute, 1 minute or less than one. Very rare scenarios within 1 minute, your Spark cluster is available. Now, if you verify, two nodes are available, one driver node, one worker node, another worker node which you can go with based on demand basis. That you can go and verify in metrics. There is a Ganglia UI as available. You can go and verify clusters, how many up clusters. Total 8 CPUs are available. All are virtual CPUs. Two nodes, one driver node, one worker node, those IP addresses. Okay. And now, if you go to create any notebook, Spark core. So as I told you, right, Spark session is available a variable called Spark. Spark context is available a variable called SC. Okay. And Spark SQL context also is available as SQL context. Still it is available, but you don't need to worry about multiple context. Spark session is having a privileges of authentication plus authorization. Nothing but Spark session not only for authentication, like a communicating to the Spark first, and then authorization. So working mainly on submitting a code and converting in a backend process. When it comes to SQL, entire internal process like SQL context will take care. So that same Spark session also can take care. Similarly, SQL context, Spark context, or Hive context. So the Spark session is having all privileges plus authentication, both. So whenever you assign this notebook, right? So backend, you can find this. Whenever you assign a cluster here, you see this cluster is assigned, and the backend Spark session available in a variable called Spark. Spark context is available a variable called SC, and SQL context is available a variable called SQL context.